right now we're seeing independent artists do really well because it really is a very small niche community. It's not about trying to sell collectibles to 10,000 or 100,000 fans. It's about
Mhm.
trying to find those top 10 to 50 fans who will support everything you do and give them a room to come together and talk to one another.
Hey friends, welcome to Smart Venture Podcast, the best information for future CEOs. Starting a company is easy, but growing and managing it is hard. In this podcast, we sit down with the best founders, experienced leaders, and investors in tech and relevant space to give you the best tips to grow your company and grow yourself. Some of our most popular episodes are about crypto founders and investors. Check out our new podcast called Keeping Up with Crypto on YouTube, iTunes, and Spotify. If you like it, don't forget to subscribe and give it a 5-star. This episode is brought to you by Momento NFT. Momento NFT is a direct-to-fan social NFT app that allows fans to own viral moments from their favorite creators and unlock perks like meet and greets, autographed merchandise, and more. As a creator, you can easily create valuable images and video NFTs of your best social content. And as a fan, you can own viral moments from your favorite creators and unlock perks like meet and greets. Momento NFT is backed by Animoca brand, Cadenza, and Mark Pincus. Check out the app available on App Store and Google Play. Hi, Cooper. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Hey, it's good to be here.
So I went to NFT NYC 2 weeks ago, and then I met you. I wouldn't be able to recognize you because I didn't imagine how tall you are. And then you're like super nice. And like, I was just like, oh my God, was this like one of the basketball players or something? That was like my thought process. But
Thank you.
yeah. So let me summarize the TLDR of your past experience for the audience who like haven't got to get deep with like, invest themselves into like listening or reading your content yet. So basically you went to school in Boulder and then you were always a fan of music. And at the beginning you studied like accounting in school and then you transitioned into music business. And then you're like, oh, there's no money to be made in here. And then basically you like discover crypto in 2017. And then you found out about Ethereum. You have invested in some of the crypto. Well, I guess it was just coin at that point. And then later on, you started just like really going down the rabbit hole. And then now you're fast forward to today, you're just one of the most well-known people in the DAO space. You were involved in like basically every significant DAO. And then you were like advising for a couple of really interesting projects such as Audius and as well as like Variant Fund. And so basically you made it. And then I also find really interesting when I listen to your Bankless podcast story. So like you mentioned about, at one point after you kind of like sort of made it and then you were listening to Jack Dorsey's story and then you find some like resonation and then you start buying Dior. And I was like, oh my God, that's so fun. But anyway, so those are like the TLDR of like your story in my mind. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I would love to hear from your perspective on how you made it basically.
Well, first of all, thank you for taking the time to listen. That really means a lot to me, and you were spot on with everything. I would say the commonality amongst everything is I'm very passionate about curation. I love finding a new industry, doing what I can to help shine a spotlight on new up and coming creators, collectibles, whatever it might be. And so these days I spend most of my time in the music NFT space. Before that, as you mentioned, was involved with a lot of DAOs. Prior to that, was very heavily involved in DeFi. Prior to that, in ICOs. And so I've kind of seen a lot of different ways with Web3. But even going back to high school, buying and selling Pokemon cards, it's really fun just to be early to a new movement and help to shape it. And so I'm very blessed to be in a position now where I can have a voice with respect to new trends happening in Web3. And I'm excited to use this conversation to dive into some of them.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so let's start with what we just talked about, like the music NFTs, right? Like, can you give us some TLDR on like how can music leverage NFT as like a way of like, helping the creator as well as like building the community as well as like monetize?
Yeah, I think at its core, being able to sell a collectible version of music is very powerful. We've seen this in the past with vinyls and CDs and 8 tapes, but what we're seeing now is we're doing the same thing online with digital collectibles. And we haven't really had the opportunity to do that before. And so what I'm excited about is finding a way just to allow new creators to poke around with Web3, doing it through a vehicle that feels very natural to them and creating a secondary market where if I'm a fan who's very early to a music act, I can come and buy a collectible version of a song. And in the event that they do well, not only do I get to say, hey, it was early to this because I have this collectible NFT, I now have the opportunity to sell that for a profit in the event that other people find that act valuable as well.
Totally. When you picture the overall picture, like how do you envision the Web3 version of Spotify look like? Like, what should you guys offer? And then like, how should, I guess, like the artists create music from like creating standpoint? Like, they can probably collaborate with other people. And like, what is the differences between like the Web3 music scene versus Web2?
There's more of a focus on the super fans with Web3 today. So instead of worrying about getting 1 million monthly listeners, instead you're optimizing for 100 collectors. And I think the reality is Web3 music is very different from Web2 music today. Web2 is about quantity, and right now Web3 is about quality. Over time, I think that all music will be streamed on chain. So in the same way you buy a Spotify subscription, you click on any song in the world and you play it, what's going to happen on the back end over the next 5 years is all of those payments and all of that attribution is going to happen on chain. This means that all of the payments will go to the artists that you listen to. This means that all the song splits will happen natively on chain. But the issue is that right now there are very, very big conglomerates who do not want to see that happen because they make the entirety of their money off of not allowing there to be a transparent system around accounting. And so in the meantime, what I've been focusing on is a new revenue stream. That to me is NFTs. It's something that's not competitive with streaming. It's not competitive with the existing models today. In the same way that you're buying a t-shirt or a concert ticket, we're now tokenizing songs and allowing fans to have a new opportunity to say, hey, I really, really like this artist and I really want to support them. I think if we zoom out a little bit more, the relationship that artists are starting to build with their fans is really important. This goes far beyond Web3 and is something that is not new by any means. We've had Patreon and fan clubs and Facebook groups for a long time. What I'm excited about with Web3 is we're starting to place an economic value on patronage. And I think this idea of trying to value how much a relationship with a creator costs is one of the main reasons why I'm so excited about the relationship between Web3 and music.
I'm curious, like, so right now, like, I guess, like, how music was related to, like, leveraging NFT, from my understanding, is like, you turn this piece of music into an NFT and then people purchase a part of it. And then, like, because of it becomes like mainstream, or like when the music gets more popular, so the person have some sort of economic return from this music. But I guess, like, if you really truly love a piece of music, how are you gonna sell it? Like, I mean, let's say I really love Taylor Swift or like Beyonce, like I don't imagine myself like selling my portion to some other people, like, because it's a part of the art investment than like we buy Picasso or like some other like well-known artists or whatever their work is because of like we value the art, instead of like we buy it because we want to make 20K from it or something, in my opinion. So I'm curious, like, how do you see that from like an investment perspective, as well as like from a collector, or like you appreciate a piece of art perspective? Like, how does that like coexist?
Yeah, there's a funny meme in NFTs that you should always buy two. And the idea here is that you're going to have one that you hold on to forever and one that you sell. I think realistically, most people do not have the financial means to buy two NFTs every time. But I think that's one of the funny and interesting dynamics with music NFTs, is with relation with music relative to something like a PFP project. I think that people have a deeper emotional resonance with music. So when you think about the opportunity for people to sell that collectible, there's going to be a lot of fans that really, really love that record, that really love that song. And what that does, it adds a supply constraint where there's only a small percentage of fans who are willing to sell that to someone else at a later date. And so what we're now doing is basically selling memories and experiences and relationships with these songs. And I think that the difference from a PFP that you put as a profile picture as a flex to owning a music collectible that resonates with you on a deep emotional level is very different. Right now we're in a state where people are very scared to commoditize music because we've never done it before. We've seen a fine art market for a really long time. We've had collectibles like Pokemon cards for a very long time, but we have not had a market for music. And I think it gets people really nervous because music is a very personal experience. In the same way that you have a Charizard, it's a little different from liking your favorite artist song that you might not know if anyone else likes. And so right now, what we're really challenging is just, do people want to have collectible experiences with music? Do people want to trade their memories and trade their experiences? My opinion is yes. I think that's what Web3 is really exciting for, but I'll be the first to say it's not all sunshine and rainbows. And there's a lot of people who are very adamant that music should not be commoditized and not made into a financial market.
Question on like from the business perspective, right? Like, what is this meant for like a big business? Let's say I'm Pepsi. I want to use like, your music into my commercial. Like, how do I acquire that? Do I just buy a part of the NFT, or like, how does that function? And then I remember you mentioned in Mint podcast, like you guys talk about like Jack Harlow. Let's say, so if I'm a musician, like I don't really want to manage myself. Like I want to just be a really good artist because that's why I'm there. And like, how do I kind of, because right now, like if everything is becoming NFT and then like a DAO. So the more of the Web3 is being more decentralized, as well as like, you take your own ownership. Now you, like you mentioned in that podcast, it's like you have to create your own LLC, you have to become the business brain too. So how is that gonna translate in the future? Because right now it's all managed by like a CAA or WME or something like that, right? So curious, like what is the core skill of the artist to succeed in the future?
There's two things there. The first one, on the brand side of things, it really depends on the type of NFT that you're buying. All NFTs come with different licensing rights. Most of the NFTs that we're seeing today on the music side do not give you the permission to get a sync license or a sync placement with your NFT. You're simply buying a non-commercial license to have a collectible version of a song. That means you can sell that collectible to someone else, but it does not mean that you can monetize the underlying copyright. And so it'll take a long time for us to get there. There's some really exciting projects that are working on selling license-based music NFTs, where I can go and buy the rights, then go sell the song to Pepsi. But that's very, very rare right now. I think the broader market opportunity is basically just allowing there to be a conversation amongst fans. And to your point about where the artist comes into this conversation, right now we're seeing independent artists do really well because it really is a very small niche community. It's not about trying to sell collectibles to 10,000 or 100,000 fans. It's about trying to find those top 10 to 50 fans who will support everything you do and give them a room to come together and talk to one another. And I think the interesting thing to point out here is, as a creator, you don't need to worry about having a personal relationship with each of those 50 fans. Instead, what you need to worry about is creating a space where those 50 fans can sit in a room together and feel like they can actually meet one another on the basis of knowing you and your artist project. And if you can create that environment for people to come together around your brand, I think you're doing just as well as giving them, say, FaceTime or doing anything to talk on a one-on-one basis.
Totally. How do you group them together and then manage the group, right? Like, let's say this podcast, I think like the closest thing for me to have a group is to have like a group Zoom call. And then because everybody is in different time zone, and then you have to promote it, and then they have to sign up for a newsletter. And so it's a lot of work to organize some sort of group event. Curious, like, how do you keep your group more, I guess, active? And then like, what if this group, like kind of, they started as, they're really loyal to you, and then this group discovers someone else. I took a class with like my friends who I met from like one of the course, and then we all migrate to like buy some other course. And for that instructor, we have no loyalty, but we became friends, right? Like, how do you make sure that that doesn't happen for your music or like your fans?
The best creators in the world are able to own their audience irregardless of what platform that they're on. So it doesn't matter if they're on Discord, Instagram, Twitter, that audience will follow them anywhere. And it's not even them being in a specific chat room on a specific platform. It's them just having shared commonality to go to shows together, to talk to each other over text. And the reality is it's really, really difficult to coordinate that. I think the obvious answer to that question about where do you place fans together would be saying, make a Discord, but I barely use Discord anymore. I think we've gotten to a place where people are getting really tired of the, exaggeration that Discord is going to solve all of our problems. And so I think if you are a creator that is trying to build a really tight niche community, just listen to your fans. Like, even the biggest artists in music NFTs right now are not really using Discord. They're just being present in Twitter spaces. They're hopping on different Zoom calls together, as you said, but that's not happening under like every day at this time we're going to meet together. It's just an open back and forth conversation. And the reality is, if you are a creator, it's less about trying to create a pocket for everyone to come and talk about you, and more about you just amplifying the right message out to the external community. People will rally behind you, but you don't need to be putting them into a Zoom call every time to like talk and hear all their opinions. You just need to be projecting messages and meanings that resonate with people. And if you can tell your story in a really powerful way, you don't have to tell that to each person individually. You can project that through your social media presence, and people will rally behind you and follow across platform, even in the absence of something like a Discord server.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so you're the expert in governing communities, right? Like, and then you are involved with like many different DAOs, and many of them are like super successful. I'm just curious, like, what makes a DAO successful? And then by govern, like, what do you mean by that? Like, what are some actions that you take to make sure that like people stay engaged in the Discord conversations?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'll say thank you for the kind words. I'm definitely far from an expert when it comes to community building. I've found that if you can create conversations for people to get to know one another, really beautiful things start to happen. And so when it comes to governance, it's as simple as placing people into a chat channel together and saying, what is the new subtopic that we want to talk about? Maybe it's books, maybe it's video games, maybe it's music. But giving people environments just to talk about shared interests is really powerful. And over time, you can start to level up the caliber of those conversations. And so at the far end of the spectrum, we're seeing people come together and managing billions of dollars of capital to make protocol upgrades, to build products together, to do IRL events. But that is kind of the rarest side of the spectrum. The more reality is that most DAOs and most social clubs are going to be no more than 25 to 50 people. And so expecting them to have any depth of like a very serious project is pretty unlikely. Instead, what you want to do is just police a safe environment where people can come and ask questions, and not feel like they're going to be ridiculed. If I can come back to a space and meet new people and meet friends that I can text on the side or go out and get drinks or get coffee or something like that, that to me is pretty powerful. And I think the level to which governance comes into the picture is really just based on how big you want to make that project and how far you want to take it.
I think there's two part of it. Like I just have question about. So as for like when you mention like get drinks and get coffee, that means like everybody have to be in physically in one place, right? Because a lot of the digital conversation, although the conversation start digitally, but like eventually you want to kind of like have the FaceTime with people, because that's how I guess like it forms more like a genuine, authentic relationship. I'm curious, like how do you recreate that kind of environment online, and then how do you make it stay sticky, I guess? Because I feel like I will lose interest like in within 2 days, because of like if someone just repeat one topic, and then like I feel like there's no chance that like I'm doing any collaboration with the person, or like kind of like having a conversation going on, I guess, because you need like keep having new things that you both experience together.
There's a difference between scheduled programming and happenstance. You can set up recurring calls to say at 1 p.m. on Monday, we're all going to come into Zoom and talk about something for 30 minutes with a strict agenda. And there's also an opportunity for you to say, hey, I'm based in LA. I'm also in this group. If you want to meet up and chat, come and hang out with me. I think there's a very big difference between 20-person IRL meetup and people meeting one-on-one on the back of a conversation of topic. I'm actually a lot more interested in the latter example there, where if we can come together and just get to know one another because of our shared love of something, I think that's going to build a deeper relationship than 30 people in the same room talking every single day. Those moments need to be pretty rare and special. If you're having a town hall, if you're having a big conversation with your community, that doesn't need to happen every single day. Instead, I think it's important just to facilitate a healthy energy and community spirit. And if people can be making friends with one another offline and out of the kind of scheduled programming you create, that's what's going to keep them coming back from work, because they're going to want to hear about what's happening. So when they have that next IRL interaction or that next one-on-one connection, they can feel up to know on it, and they can feel like they're educated and cultured about what's happening in the group.
Totally. So let's switch the topic to the business side. So originally you were about to be a CPA, and then like now you find like, you got very financially successful as well. Like I believe I watched one of these videos, like the person basically mentioned that you give your parents some like Bitcoin or Ethereum, and then like now they basically paid off their mortgage, and then you paid off your student loans. And like, so that's super awesome. How can a normie make money in the DAO ecosystem? And you're also like not technical. So I know that you're the bridge between like music or like artists and developers. Like how do you kind of create that position for yourself? Like what do you need to get there?
It's going to be harder and harder to make money in Web3 as it becomes more mainstream. And so the reality is I was just pretty early and in the right place at the right time. I think I worked hard for what I have, but I think it was really just about believing in something when no one else did. And so if you are a normie that's getting into Web3, trying to find a pocket where you can really own a space that people are not really talking about, I think is probably your best opportunity at success. What this starts at realistically is just being present in a community and doing the tasks that nobody wants to do. When I started out my career in Web3, I was doing interviews, I was taking notes at meetings, I was going to hackathons and talking to the hackathon winners, and doing very small things that did not have a lot of economic upside. When I was doing those activities, I was not thinking, oh, how can I make the most money? Instead, I was just thinking, how can I be as informed as possible on this topic and on this culture? Because once I felt opinionated and informed on it, that's when I started to make money. Because I could say, oh, I understand why people are spending their time and energy here, or I understand why this project's doing well. And before you come into the space and think about how do I make money, instead, I would ask yourself, how do I feel tapped into the conversation and the culture? So when something new is happening, I can jump on that really confidently and go at that with conviction. And if you can start to operate from a standpoint of being able to know when the right things are happening and when the right places are happening, I think the profit opportunities are going to present themselves. But it's really important to recognize it's probably not going to come until you have a couple tasks under your belt that are just very minute things that you don't want to do, but that are required for you to actually be tapped into the culture itself.
Totally. So you're writing white papers back in time, and then you like started ETH exists in like 2017. So I'm curious, like at the beginning, how do you learn these stuff? And then what do you start? Because right now there's so many things going on. Like there's NFT space, there's crypto space, there's DeFi, there is basically just literally anything. And like as a normie, like what is your thought process on like, educating yourself? And then because there's so many Google videos and then there's so many, podcasts and everything, like in what order do you like, teach yourself? And then at what level do you, start creating with others?
I think you got to go into it prepared to take a couple L's. You got to go into it knowing that you're not going to work with the best projects, that you need to get some experience under your belt. My first year or so working in crypto was completely unpaid. I think I might have made like $5,000, but I was working with brand new projects, projects people had never heard of, and just looking for a shot just to learn. I think if you're someone new to coming into this space, it's good to be aware of like the top projects and the things that everyone's talking about, but it's unrealistic for you to be involved with them on a day-to-day basis. Instead, you got to find people around you that are just completely new to it. Recognize that you're all probably very bad at what you're doing, but that there's an opportunity to learn. And if you can find yourself in a position where you can be taking on ownership responsibility of key items that are going to be the same across different communities, you can level up over time. And so to your question about governance and community building, that stemmed from my work doing DAOs in 2018 with Metacartel, to then doing on-chain governance work for DeFi protocols in 2019, to then doing more like community building with friends with benefits, and then now to music. But it's all kind of a ramp up. I didn't go out on day one and think I was going to make the best proposal for the biggest crypto project. I instead just looked for who's going to give me an opportunity just to be in the community, in the conversation. How do I get myself to an NFT NYC? How do I get myself to a DevCon or to these communities? And if you really just put yourself out there and just kind of put it all on the line, we're still so early to crypto that if you can find one or two intersections that you really want to own, there's really a high degree that you can really get to make a name for yourself. And with that, I think a lot of that money is going to follow.
Totally. What if you're running, let's say if you're, so some of the listeners are actually executive at big tech company. So let's say you're like a VP of Amazon. What should you do to make your team more Web3 focused or like Web3 friendly? What would you do to, I guess, be more informed in the industry?
I don't think that you should tell anyone on your team to start learning about Web3 until you see it very clearly for yourself. And so this doesn't mean that you need to own a lot of NFTs. It doesn't mean that your brand needs to own a lot of NFTs, but you do need to understand the day-to-day conversation and nature of what's happening. If you don't, I think it's going to be very obvious that your play in Web3 is very inauthentic. And so if I am the executive of a large tech company, I would just be doing stuff completely on my own, completely outside of work. I wouldn't look at it through the lens of like, how do I get my brand to get involved here? I would simply just try and tap into some conversations and find a pocket that I think is interesting or exciting. The same way you would go and find a subreddit, the same way you would go and find a YouTube channel you really like. Just find a space in Web3 that's compelling to you and just learn from being present in that community without asking for something, and then pull those ideals and values out and apply that to your brand later. If you try and just go at it and use all of the same playbooks or templates that people already know, people in Web3 can see that from a mile away. And I honestly think that at this point in time, you're doing yourself a disservice by trying to be in Web3 just to be in Web3. I think the better thing to do is just to simply be aware of why Web3 is exciting to people and why people get so motivated by it. And once you really start feeling that yourself, then you can start to translate that energy and that culture to your employees. And once people really understand that, then those conversations can come from a very natural place. And I think that's where you can actually start to create experiments that get the respect and the knowledge of people that have been in this space for a very long time.
What is a company or like a collaboration that you feel like it's more Web3 native?
Adidas did a really great collaboration with G Money. G Money is a really close friend of mine, and he's always been so forward thinking when it comes to fashion. Adidas recognized that they are not the most forward brand when it comes to Web3, but they did see someone in G Money who was extremely forward thinking. And so instead of trying to drive themselves into this whole playbook where they architected everything, they really leaned on him and his community. And I think that's unrealistic to assume that every brand can have some like giant Web3 act who's helping to lead their charge. But what it goes to say is that there are people who have spent their whole life living and breathing Web3. There will continue to be people who have a brand and name for themselves on the back of Web3. Don't try and do everything yourself. Instead, look to bring on a couple people who are really native to this space and help make sure that they give this thing a co-sign of approval rather than trying to do it yourself from scratch.
Totally. You mentioned that your friend has a good community. Like, what is a good community meant for you? Besides, like, a very active Discord group, like how do you, I guess, like cultivate that to, to make it more, to make it a better community in general?
You can basically tell the strength of someone's community by how many responses they get to their GM tweets in the morning. If you're getting anywhere over 100, upwards to like 500 or 1,000, that person is like really, really ingrained in the mix. I think people, have waves where they're like more or less, tapped in at any given time. But like all the most consistent people that have community in Web3, they're just so vocal in the conversation on Twitter. When they tweet out GM every morning, they're getting 150 responses, 500 likes. And those are the people that I think you want to pay attention to because they really have a significant influence. And back to our conversation earlier, they don't necessarily even have Discord servers. They're just public. A lot of these conversations are happening in public. They're joining Twitter spaces. Behind the scenes, they're connecting the dots with really important people. But building strong community is less about like trying to do it every single day and more so just about being authentic. Like if you're making a wave and something that you're really passionate about, people see that. You don't need to like scream from the rooftops or tell them, like just live your own life and just like build the story that you want to create. And so long as it's authentic and it's real, people are going to see that and then follow in your footsteps to do the same thing.
Totally. So now you have like over 100K followers on Twitter. Basically, you built a name for yourself, right? Like, can you tell us like the TLDR of like how it all happened? Was it like, did it happen like last year or did it happen like, 3 years ago? Curious, like, do you intentionally do anything or like how does the growth happen in general?
Yeah, I haven't really reflected on it in a while. I would say that Twitter growth really started to happen like a year and a half ago at this point. I think I crossed 10K on Twitter in 2020, if I had to guess. There was a period of time when I was doing a lot of journalism for DeFi blogs, and I think that's where it really started. Back to my point earlier about making sure that you were in the conversation. I was tweeting every day about relevant things that were happening. I was connecting the dots between different founders. I was talking about different coins that were launching. And my initial following was built on the back of me just having an informed opinion on the day-to-day conversation of Web3. Since then it's gotten a lot bigger. And I think a lot of my inflection point for Twitter came from really caring about creator culture, really caring about social spaces, still having that same lens of like, okay, this is a reputable crypto project to pay attention to. But instead of me following a trend that everyone else was following was obvious, I started to think, what is the trend that I want to care about? Like, what is the thing that I want to start directing people towards? It was really through that kind of like DAO and NFT lens that I started to really gain a name for myself. But it was a very conscious effort. I had friends that I was like in healthy competitions with to say like, okay, whoever gets to 50K first, there was each other like a steak dinner or something like that. And just like sending threads to my friends to help support them and being able to like give critique and feedback about like, okay, how do you write the best tweet storm? And, on the outside, it's really easy to hate on social media and to hate on like quote unquote influencer lifestyle. But to me, it was never really about like wanting to have an influence. It was about wanting to spread meaningful messages and help people feel informed on the conversation. And when I started to really care about that, writing tweets every day became so fun and exciting. It was never like it was like a habit to like, oh, I need to tweet or post this many times. It was just like, no, like I'm kind of in my own vibe right now. People kind of know what they can expect out of me. I'm providing information that feels valuable to me. So I'm hoping other people will learn from it. And through that, it just kind of snowballs. I mean, there's no surprise that this last year in crypto has been viral beyond belief. But that paired with me coming out here to LA and being surrounded by a lot of creators who really care about their online presence, it was a lot easier for me to start caring about that. And I think that the results speak for themselves.
Totally. When you are actually creating content, so you also have your blog. So you wrote a lot of really thoughtful pieces. Those are way longer than a tweet storm. I'm curious, when you are writing these things, like how do you gather your inspirations? Like, do you have like a folder that you collect things that inspire you, or like, how do you kind of like create your information diet and then putting it out to, in a format that works for you?
Yes, I think this breakdown will be helpful for anyone that's thinking about how to get into writing. When I first started writing, I was just doing one-off news pieces. And so early on in the music industry, I was writing blog posts about a song that had just dropped and an artist that I wanted to share. When I got into Web3, I started writing about DeFi, which was saying, hey, this new coin just launched or this project just announced a fundraise. And it was very much a one-on-one basis. I was writing 500 to 750 words and just trying to get factual information across and help to like break down some giant article into like 500 words, just really get the key points. Once I got good at that, I started to think about how do I start to write trend pieces that look at many different projects at once instead of focusing just on one focal point. And so now what you'll see for me is I write a lot less. I probably publish one article every 3 months, but it's like a very big vision piece on the current status of a trend or an industry. And so it'll break down a lot of very different things at once and it'll help give you a lay of the land, but you can zoom into any individual piece there and then go deep on that. And so these days I run a music NFT newsletter called This Week in Music NFTs. For those who may have followed me from before, I used to run a newsletter called DeFi Rate, where we ran This Week in DeFi. And it's a really great way just to help people stay up to date with what's happening in the everyday culture of music NFTs in 5 minutes and less. And so I try and pair it with one form of content that's very much like actionable, like here's what you need to pay attention to right now today, versus like a trend piece that's like, here's kind of the general direction of where this is headed. If you are a founder, builder, collector, or operator in the space, here are some things to keep on your radar so that you can make an impact on the space as well.
Where do you get your original source of information? Was it from like news, like, CoinDesk or something? Or how do you, or like research paper, how do you kind of put it together?
It's hard to pick one specific source because the conversation is always so changing and challenging. I have this saying that if I hear about something from three independent people that I know and trust, I will drop everything I'm doing to go and learn about it. And so if I'm on Zoom calls like this and I hear about a project from someone, I hop on another one, they tell me about the same project, and a third person co-signs that, I know that that's something that's worth paying attention to. Granted,
Mhm.
that's a privilege of mine, having been in this space for a long time and having a lot of conversations with, very informative people. But I would say more broadly, Twitter is the source for all Web3 conversation. It's easy to
Mhm.
get lost in that. And I actually think that a lot of this Twitter space stuff has gotten dangerous because there was a long time Twitter space did not exist and that was not something that you could just get consumed in. But I would say if
Mhm.
you stay up with some of the brightest minds in the space, you just keep an eye on what they're tweeting about, you can start to see through the lines and find the projects that are worth following. And anyone that's doing great work in the space, people in Web3 support that so heavily. And it's actually less
Mhm.
about you needing to like dig for information. It's more about just creating like a field and a radar that's in front of you. And if you can start to pick and choose spots to start pulling information out from, that's how you can aggregate some really, really valuable content.
Who do you think like influence how you think in the space? Is there any like particular people that you feel like influence which direction you want to go? And then also right now you already made a name for yourself. Like how do you picture your career evolve? Do you envision yourself starting the next gen Spotify, or what is your like end goal?
Yeah, thank you. Two really amazing questions there. On the inspiration standpoint, I really love the way that Naval thinks. He has some really prolific tweets, and I think that
Mm.
how short and succinct he is really, really beautiful. Jesse Walden at Variant is a close mentor of mine. He's very concise in his thoughts. He published a piece called "The Ownership Economy" in 2019 that's been very influential in my career. Chris Kerninsky from Placeholder, I remember this was one of the first people that followed me on Twitter back when I had like 5K, and he has
Mhm.
some really, really amazing articles that just speak about protocol theses and ways to think about Web3. A lot of the guys at Andreessen, Chris Dixon, Fred Esherim from Paradigm, I think is brilliant. Olaf Carlson from Polychain, I think is a wonderfully cool and exciting person. There are a lot of beautiful, beautiful minds in crypto that made a name for themselves by being independent and free in their own lane. And if I strive to do anything, it's really just to create a world for myself that I feel confident in, but allow people to see that I'm very convicted in my desires and in my vision. And so to
Mhm.
your point about what my career looks like from here, I still believe I have done nothing of relevance when it comes to Web3 and more broadly the rest of the world. So it's all good and well to have some followers on Twitter. It's all good and well to have made a little bit of money, but impact is something that lasts far beyond my lifetime. And so my goal is to help create technology that will empower creators for many generations to come. I think I'm still figuring out exactly what that playbook looks like, but if I had to take a guess, I would say it's helping to invest and support in the current generation of Web3. And if we zoom out in 3 to 5 years from now, I hope to be very involved with the thing that becomes a staple name in every household.
So you invest in over 20 crypto companies. I don't know how many now, maybe like 100 or something. Like, how do you pick which company that you want to invest both your money and time in? And
It's
what
all a
kind
vibe check. Super funny
of
because I think people expect there to be like a pitch deck and some like really strong fundamental thesis. But
Mhm.
my investment thesis is basically hop on a call with the founder. Do I get
Mhm.
along with that founder? And do I think that founder is smart? Do I see that that founder has a knowledge about either how things function before Web3 or about how Web3 is functioning today? And is this someone that I want to build a relationship with over a very long time horizon? Me as an investor, I try and be very particular about where I slot in. But at this point in time, capital is really just a resource to empower people. And I think if you can find
Mhm.
yourself in a position to help empower the brightest minds in the world, things can get really, really special. And so when it comes down to investing, I started out just buying coins on Uniswap. It's just me and
Mhm.
my boys on a Zoom call, being like, this chart looks good, or like there's this meme or this thing's coming out, like let's just go buy it on Uniswap. But now I have the privilege of being able to sit with founders before they share their ideas with the world and make a
Mhm.
convicted bet on saying, hey, I think that this guy's correct. I think before
Mhm.
anyone else see this thing that this gonna have potential. And if it's something that I can get and really internalize on the very first call, that's generally where it goes. I try not to like overthink the investment thesis so much. And I think that's because I'm
Mhm.
an angel. I'm not investing a ton. I'm just like kind of slotting in.
Mhm.
But it's been really fun just to try and take a bet on like, okay, where is the puck going? And how do I make sure that my capital is placed in that right direction? And if I can start to build
Mhm.
a track record for myself for being successful in that work, I think it's going to amplify a lot of the other work that I've been doing.
Totally. Where do you guys like so I'm not really exactly familiar with like the crypto investing part. So in web 2, I guess everybody, so like many people are on angel lists, and then many people are just like in traditional investment firms. Like, so curious, like as a like individual angel crypto investor, like how do you guys actually like um practically invest in the deal? Like, do you guys like what website do you use? And then like how does that happen? Do you guys invest in like crypto into the company, or do you guys invest in like USDT?
The most common route is that I'm buying a SAFE, which is a simple agreement for future equity with a token warrant. I'm
Mhm.
basically wiring money from my bank account to the company's bank account. We have a Zoom call. We lock in the amount that I'm investing in. They send over a couple documents for me to sign, and then they
Mhm.
send me wire instructions to send money to their bank account. In very rare case scenarios, I'm actually buying tokens, but in most of these companies, tokens are like a graduation point and like a sign of maturity. I think tokens are basically the new IPO. And so a lot of the time, I'm not actually buying tokens. I'm buying a bet on the fact this company can get to a point where they'll hopefully launch a token in the future. And so there are rare examples when I'm sending like USDC to like an on-chain account, but most of it is USD. I'd say nowadays it's getting closer to like 50-50, where most founders do want USDC. There's some amazing platforms like Syndicate, which I've used to do some investments before. I've done some stuff on AngelList. I've done some wire transfers. There's a lot of just really great options, but at the end of the day, it's just giving capital to a company. And so it's kind of irrelevant like what platform we use to do that, and more so just about making sure that we can be aligned through our shared investment and our shared knowledge. And I think that conversation is always going to be changing.
At the beginning, you mentioned contract. Do they physically send you the contract, or that's smart contract?
No, physical contracts, like a DocuSign link that has like the safe in it, and it basically says like, this is how much ownership you're getting, this is how much money you're investing, here's your signature block. It's really funny because like I never wanted to be an angel investor. I never like tried to like seek out, like I remember I read like venture capital books in like 2018 when I was going through some like boot camps and stuff, but like I never like wanted to consciously be like a venture investor. I think it just kind of
Mhm.
happened by nature of being early to projects, being a founder, like being involved with these tokens behind the scenes. And then you start to see like how a company is really built. And I think the reality is that crypto gives a bad rep to venture capital, but these are some of the smartest people in the world who are giving you capital to go and build something before they have any clue whether or not it's going to work. And so it's been a really fun game for me to be able to wrap my head around. I try and sit very carefully between private and public markets, because I think if you get too caught up in the private market, you can really lose touch of like the general public conversation.
Mhm.
But it's been an honor and a privilege, and I see myself doing it for quite a long time. And I'm very happy to be in the position that I am today.
Totally. How do you do due diligence when these projects come along? Like I have heard investor pass on nowadays, like you can tell as like, billion-dollar projects because of their deck look sketchy or something. How can you tell from the early stage this is a good company to invest in, especially when you're not coming from a technical background?
It's basically all just word of mouth. At this point, I've been fortunate enough to develop a really strong network of funds, investors, operators, people that I really know and trust. I really don't seek out investment opportunities. I just kind of let
Mhm.
them come to me on the inbound. And there's a lot of times when founders say they want to have a conversation, and it's really as simple as hopping on a Zoom call like this. I would say the
Mhm.
important thing there, though, is you cannot be the one who's always just receiving deals. Like you really need to be present and moving things in the forefront and giving people a good deal flow to act from. And so it's really a two-way street. I have a relationship with a lot of different venture funds. For Variant, for example, I would basically share my deals in Radar every Monday, where I'd look at the 10 to 15 deals that came across my desk and say like, hey, here's all of them. Here are the 2 or 3 that I think are interesting to check out. And then it's vice
Mhm.
versa. Like Variant will send me like an investment opportunity, be like, hey, we're leading this round. We think you should follow on to it for X, Y, and Z reason.
Mhm.
And it's really just a trust-based thing. If these companies are backed by some of the brightest minds in the space, even before they launch a product, or even when they're really early in that product's life cycle, I can feel confident that they're headed in the right direction because they have the support of people that I really love and trust.
So because in venture capital, primarily everybody's focusing on the upside. And then like if you just invest in one great deal, if you invest in like, a Facebook or a Snapchat or something, you're set for life, right? Like you're on the Midas list and you're done. But for crypto investing, like is that the same kind of sentiment? Like you can just focus on the upside, like invest in, 500 projects, pray and pray, or like, what's your personal view on that? And then in general, what's the difference between like Web2 investing and Web3?
I can't speak a ton on Web2 investing because I've never been a Web2 investor. I could say that for me personally, I
Mhm.
started out very broad. So I probably did about 60 deals in 2022.
Mhm.
or 2021, excuse me. And that was really just me supporting any founder that I thought had a cool idea and something that could
Mhm.
come to the table. As I've done more investing, I'm starting to realize that conviction is really what creates wealth. And so being able to find 2 or 3 companies that you think are really going to win their category. And so trying to find the company or the category that's going to win out and be the market leader is really the sole goal of investing. What I will say though, the thing that I've had the hardest time coming to terms with is that venture capital investing is just chasing markups. And so what
Mhm.
that means is a lot of the time investors are investing not because they think this is going to be a company that saves the world. It's because they
Mhm.
know that they will be able to raise capital at a later date in a higher valuation. And if you put your capital in first, you're going to be up at a premium and you've done a good job.
Mhm.
And so the thing that I'm trying to figure out is when I am investing, venture capital investing is really just making sure you get your money in the round as soon as possible. Once you have that money in that round, you've done your job. And sure, you can
Mhm.
be value added, but for most venture investors, they actually are not super active anymore. And so I'm
Mhm.
trying to balance the right relationship where if I give a founder money, it's not about me just chasing a markup. It's me being actually present in that conversation. But I'll be the first to say it's hard. The name of investing is really just to be across as many high value companies as possible. It's to be a goalkeeper and not to be sort of someone that's out there chasing the puck. And so it's less about you wanting to make sure you invest in every deal and more so just
Mhm.
making sure you don't miss the one that's going to become that Uber or that Coke. And so it's a never ending journey. I'm still learning a ton, and by no means do I think I'm an excellent investor in any way, shape, or form, but I am starting to put some shots on goal. And I think sooner or later, some of those are going to hit really well.
Totally. I think like if I were you, I would do the very different approach because I think you are in a unique position that you are really focused on the music sector, right? If I were you, I would just invest in like 50 different music projects. I'm sure one of them would be the Spotify, right? Like, I mean, if they're early enough, they have great people, and then I would have just like invest in like everybody for a little bit. If one of them hit, then like it would be great, right? Like curious, like why don't you just do that for like music since you're basically the expert in that?
I mean, I kind of have done that for the first generation of music. So Audius
Mm.
was one of the earliest projects of music that I was really heavily involved with. I was lucky to help work on that token launch and continue to be an advisor today. I'm
Mhm.
an investor in Catalog, Sound, Royal. There's some tokenized communities like Medallion that I'm invested in. And there's really a lot of stuff that I think is coming around the corner that's going to be very exciting. Arpeggi from a music creation standpoint, I'm an investor in. But I think we're starting to see now that people are starting to milk the word music NFT and getting
Mhm.
rounds together because of the fact that they're in music and crypto. But the thing
Mhm.
that made music NFTs so special to me is there is such a very prominent culture around music NFTs. And in this next year, we're going to see a lot of people pouring a lot of money into this space, doing things for the wrong reason. And so I think for
Mhm.
me, it's less about trying to make sure that my capital is in every company that could have a markup and more so about making sure that my capital is backing companies and founders that I think are doing this for the right reason. And I think doing it for the right reason is more important than trying to make a little bit of return on your capital.
Totally. So, what do you think would make a Web3 music company succeed? Because right now, from the information that I gather from our conversation, right? Like, number one, if you are an artist, you need to be a community manager, or at least I have like a really good sense of like how to engage with your audience. And then you have to have some sort of like finance knowledge because of like you will be probably creating a DAO. And then it's like money will be involved when people purchase your NFT. And then number three is you have to be a king at partnership, like Steve Aoki or someone that's basically partner with everybody in the space, not everybody, but like have the tech connection. And then number five is probably your music, right? Like, so I think it just sounds like it just takes a really, really good business startup founder to be successful in the music space. Is that correct? Or do you feel like it's completely BS because you are still supposed to be focusing on your art, like artistic creation?
Yeah, I mean, there's levels to it. I think the reality is if you are a Web3 artist, you need to care about economic schemas way more than you ever had to in the past. I think the biggest feedback I get from creators who have done well for themselves in Web3 music is there is a necessity to focus more on like economics than on creative art. And I think that that is definitely an issue. I would say broadly, if you're a founder building in the space, just make it easy for creators to use Web3. You don't have to reinvent the wheel and don't try and dumb it down so that it's like as easy as logging into Instagram because it's not that easy. And there's actually a lot to be learned from having to go through the challenges of setting up a MetaMask and buying an NFT and listing it on OpenSea. And I think your opportunity as a founder today is just trying to abstract that by 3 degrees. You don't have to try and like dumb it down or demystify it or decrypto it or something. Help people learn the culture through practice and action. Help them see the challenges that exist today and have to jump through those hoops. Because after they jump through a couple of hoops and they get a couple of wins under their belt, you're never going to leave. People who
Mm.
only collect like one NFT here and there, artists only do one drop and then like make $1 million and never come back. Like that is not helpful for the space. Like what the
Mhm.
space needs is more examples of people who are doing their entire career on the back of Web3 or on a very fine lens. They're actually having a tie-in with Web3 that feels very meaningful to their brand. So every single time they release a song, they feel the need to tokenize it, and there's a collectible version of it in the world. And so to really just wrap that together, don't try and reinvent the wheel. You know, most of the underlying primitives that make music NFTs so exciting have already been established. Instead, try and find ways just to make those underlying primitives more accessible. And if you can be the funnel that helps to bring in the next 1,000 creators and pair them with the next 10,000 fans that are willing to collect, I think you're gonna have some really, really exciting stuff happening under the hood.
I think because you're non-technical and then you educate yourself pretty well in the space, how technical should you go when you're actually researching this space? Do you have to take some boot camp to just like get to know the basics of like fundamental of how to write a smart contract or something? Like how far do you go in that sense?
No, you absolutely do not have to take a boot camp. I would say just know how the things work. You don't need to know how to be
Mhm.
able to deploy them themselves, but be able to have a conversation with the developer. If they talk about smart contract logic, you can understand what's happening. Because for a lot of developers, you can just help instruct them on how you want something to work more so than having to build it yourself. And so a lot of
Mhm.
the relationship I have with developers as a project manager is just saying like, okay, conceptually, I know how on-chain contracts work. I know how these different functions work. I know how things like staking and voting work. You know, I know how on-chain splits could work. And if we can have a conversation about conceptually the way in which these things stack together, you know, they can be running the unit test, they can be actually writing the contract themselves, but you can help to like present a vision for how something works under the hood and allow someone else to bring
Mhm.
it to life. And so if you're new to the space, don't worry about trying to learn Solidity. Don't worry about trying to like learn how to program. Instead, just learn how these things operate and what conceptually they're capable of. And once you feel like I have a good idea, like challenge yourself to really see what that looks like. Because I noticed that a
Mhm.
lot of people who are non-technical think they know way more than they do technically speaking. And if you're not working directly with someone who's deploying code, it's very difficult to know like what's actually possible. And that goes beyond Web3. You know, that goes beyond like writing a smart contract. This also is product design. This also UI UX. This is also backend system management, data storage. You know, building shit is really, really hard. And I think people are really, you know, think that they can just whip something up. But like if you tried to ship anything of value before, you recognize that it's a very difficult thing. And so instead
Mhm.
of trying to be someone who's building everything, find a team around you to just build very small things and just push them out into the world. Because every time you push something out, you're going to learn something new. And I think that's the way that you can go from being non-technical and having a vague idea of how something's working to being non-technical and knowing very thoroughly what does and does not work.
Like let's do an example. So on Spotify there's two parts of the business, right? Like music and then there's podcasts. So if you and I are starting like a podcast DAO or like a podcast web3 company, how should we start? Like what are some steps that we take to kind of put this team together?
I would say starting with your existing community and getting a feel for what they're already working on. You know, there's some
Mhm.
amazing platforms out there now like Coop and Castle that make Web3 social clubs a lot more accessible. And so as
Mhm.
a podcast, I don't think you need to reinvent the wheel, build your own website, do your own custom mint or something like that. You know, find an opportunity for 10 people who listen to the podcast to come and collect NFTs on a regular basis. You know, use something like
Mhm.
POAPs and just get people to have on-chain affiliation with your group. And once you feel like there is a little bit of a threshold where there's more than 10 people that care about the idea of making this a Web3 native community, you know, look around you and leverage the tools that exist. I think for most creators, you can get pretty far along using the existing tools today. You know, platforms like Mira example are really, really amazing. And then once you hit a threshold and a breaking point, that's when you go and start to build custom. You know, I think the worst thing you could do is get stuck in this idea limbo where you're trying to like spec out and build this site from the ground up.
Mhm.
When in reality, you can stand something up in an existing platform, see where you can reach your limits. And then once you hit those limits, work with people in that group to build something new.
When you mentioned like collecting, so like you find 10 people who will be constantly collecting NFTs together. By NFTs, do you mean like I have to drop like art NFTs or like is that just podcast as an NFT? Like this podcast and then I turn it into an NFT.
All media will be tokenized. This podcast will be an NFT. Every song will be an NFT. All art will be an NFT. You don't have to make a visual component with the art. Like literally something as simple as this episode with its existing cover art you're going to put on Spotify, finding a way to tokenize that and letting people come and collect that for free, not even trying to sell it. That's going to
Mhm.
get you super far along. Now, if it's something as simple as saying like, okay, you made it this far in the episode, DM me this code to get a POAP, and someone DMs you that code and it's a POAP of this exact episode, like that's how you start to build that social graph. I think over time, as you
Mhm.
start to create a web and a network of tokenized content, that's where things can come together. And to really just sort of tie it all together, tokenized media will underpin all artist economies. And so if you're tokenizing all of these podcasts and you start to create a network of different podcast episodes, Then your fans and your listeners will start to curate, okay, this one was better than this one. I needed to collect this episode instead of this episode. That'll drive secondary sales. That'll drive economic activity. And then eventually you zoom out and you're like, okay, we have a network of 100 tokenized episodes. All of those have varying degrees of curation in them. And now we want to start to make a podcast token, because this podcast token is necessary to help govern all of the micro actions that are happening across all of those 100 podcast episodes.
Wow. So as a guest, like, do you expect me to like give you half of whatever this episode is? Like, how does that work? As you mentioned, I'm not exactly sure, like, should I be involved guest with this, or like, do I need guest approval for this? Because I don't want to use anything without your approval, right? Like you'll be like, let's say one day you become, Elon Musk level successful. And then like, I publish this podcast and then like, let's say 99% fans coming from you. So I don't want to take advantage of any guest. Like, I'm just curious, like, how does that make sense in economically, like for the guest?
There's not a concrete answer here. I would say if you are selling something, getting the consent of that guest is very important. So if you choose
Mm,
to sell 100 copies of this episode for 0.1 ETH each, I think it's really important that you make sure that I, as the guest on this, am involved in that conversation.
mm,
I think the simpler way to do it is just make sure that tokenized content is given away for free. Just don't even
okay.
look to try and make any money off of it. If
Mhm.
there's secondary sales that come in, there are things like 0x splits that you can use to help route it to creators. But at its core, I personally, I can't speak for other guests on this podcast, would have no issue with you tokenizing a free version of this and allowing people to collect it. And if
Mm.
you bring to me the tokenized version and say, hey, collect the first one because you're the guest of this, and have like an NFT that represents this episode, that's basically the same thing as having a split on it. And I think that'll get you far enough along to make sure that people feel involved in that conversation.
Totally. And why should the listeners collect this as a token? Because they can listen to it on the Web2 systems, right? Like Spotify, Apple, or something. What motivates them to collect this?
This is the underlying powerful primitive of Web3. I believe that all media will be free to consume, but valuable to own. And so it's not about needing to have the NFT to consume this episode or listening to it. It's about collecting the NFT to show that you really resonated with this particular conversation. And if I am someone that's
Mm.
in your community and listening to all of these episodes, if I have a social graph of the 5 episodes that I love the most, that allows me to have a conversation with someone else in this community. That does not mean that I can't listen to it on Spotify. It's just saying, hey, I'm going that extra distance to show that I really love this particular guest. And if they can give me an opportunity to signal that affiliation through an NFT, that allows those relationships to go one level deeper and start to create that community that we talked about earlier in the episode.
What website should I use for this kind of tokenization?
There's a couple of platforms out there. Coinvise is a really awesome site to be able to mint free NFTs. Coop, KOP.xyz is really awesome. Castle is a really, really cool platform.
Mhm.
At its core, I think POAP would get the job done for 99% of this, to be honest with you. POAP.xyz. You can create episodes very consistently. And I think right now, tokenized media is so early that just creating a system where you feel comfortable just tokenizing anything and everything you're doing is going to be such a huge advantage. That doesn't mean that you
Mhm.
need to worry about selling it out or having people collect it. It's like, just get it out there. Like, just be forward and just like showing that tokenized media has value. And if you can start to create like very early examples of that, I think that you'll start to have an edge with this podcast and media in general. And it's something that people will really start paying attention to.
Wow. So like I just upload MP3 on top of it so people can start collecting.
I think in its simplest form, it's just a POAP that doesn't even have the conversation affiliated with it. I think it's just the cover art of this episode and saying like, this POAP is rewarded to anyone who listened to this episode with Cooper on this date. And it doesn't have the underlying audio on it. But I think over time, you can start to create a system where it does have the underlying audio with it itself. The same way that a music NFT has a cover art and a song underneath it. That's where things get a little bit more serious. But for your sanity, I think it's literally just going to POAP and making an episode of this and just saying like, yo, like if you want to collect this specific episode, enter this code and DM you. The Metaverse team, so METAV3RVSE, they do tokenized POAPs for all of their Twitter spaces. And so if you go to the space and you reply to a tweet, they'll then DM you a POAP link to claim. I think there's fun ways to start playing around with like ongoing rewards for active listening. And if you can get into a system where you can just upload an episode to your distributor the same way you put it on like RSS feed or get it on Spotify, but now you have like an extra 5 minutes where you're just creating a POAP of that episode too, I think it'd be a really fun counterpart to add into the mix.
Okay, so what is your day-to-day like now? I saw that you went to Coachella, you took picture with Bryce Hall the other day. I was like, oh my God, this person's living the dream life. What is your day-to-day like? And then you also mentioned that you block time, that you govern all these DAOs, and then like, you just mentioned that you are taking investor calls as investors in like potential companies. How do you organize your time?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say that I spend my time working on anything and everything that's interesting or exciting to me on any given day. And so I don't try and like put myself in different positions that feel like I need to be there. There's kind of an ongoing culture and community around Web3 and specifically now music that I think is really, really fascinating. And so I live here in LA, which means I'm surrounded by beautiful creators just by being present in this community. I absolutely love music. So I'm going to a ton of concerts and a ton of shows. On the day to day, I'm talking to a bunch of founders, operators, investors who are working in Web3, but I do not have a fixed schedule. Instead, I block out time for people who are doing interesting things. And I try and make sure that I'm just aware of everything that's happening on the day to day basis of what I love. And so, like I said before, if you can find 3 people that you know and trust that are talking about a project independent of one another, you're going to find something really beautiful. I just try and surround myself with as many people as I can that inspire me. That might take me to Coachella, it might take me to Amsterdam tomorrow, but through that opportunity, I'm getting to learn and see a lot of the world. I think beyond any of the money that I'm making, that is what's really exciting about Web3 is the opportunity to experience life in a really full self-sovereign sense. And if you're someone that's made it this far in the episode, give yourself a chance. Give yourself like 2 or 3 months just to really get ingrained in this culture. Try and meet people that you feel safe to talk to. And I think over time, you're going to find that you can create whatever life you want to live. And if you keep yourself focused and dedicated and work just a little harder than some other people, I think you're going to find yourself in a pretty healthy position.
Totally. Thank you so much. That's so beautiful. Okay, so we have a 1-minute mini fire round for you.
Go ahead.
So, first question, what's your favorite book?
Favorite book is The Untethered Soul by Adam Singer.
Who would you invite to your dinner party?
I would invite Jack Harlow to my dinner party.
Oh, nice. Who made the biggest impact in your career?
Biggest impact in my career was probably my friend Lucas, who has been working with me in crypto for 5 years.
Where can we find you outside of work?
Outside of work, you can find me getting acai at Body Energy Club or getting sushi at Sugarfish.
Thank you so much, Cooper. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. This is a fantastic episode. If you want to stay up with my work, I'm at Koopa on Twitter and at Koopa on Instagram. Twitter is more for the day-to-day NFTs and DAOs. Instagram is more for the culture, but very excited and active on both of those. So please make sure to stay up. And thank you again for having me on this episode.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. If you enjoyed today's episode, please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out. Have a wonderful day.